Without further ado, for the rest of the hour, we are very honored to have Joel Skousen as a political scientist by training, specializing in the philosophy of law, constitutional theory. Is also a designer of high-security residences and retreats. He has designed self-sufficient and high-security homes throughout North America and has consulted in Central America as well. His latest book in the field is Strategic Relocation North American Guide to Safe Places, and is an active consultant with persons who need to relocate for security purposes, increase self-sufficiency. He also assists people who need to live near large city to develop contingency retreat plans involving rural, farm, and recreation property. And the globalists all have underground bunkers and offshore bases. I mean, this is smart. Joel was raised in Oregon and later served as a fighter pilot for the U.S. Marine Corps during Vietnam War prior to beginning his design firm and specializing in high-security residence retreat. During the 80s, he took a leave of absence to serve as chairman of the Conservative National Committee in Washington, D.C., and concurrently served as executive editor of Conservative Digest. For 2 years, he published the newsletter entitled World Affairs Brief and served as the senior editor for a lot of other quarterly journals for law and government. The World Affairs Brief is now back in publication for many years now and is available as a weekly email newsletter or a monthly print edition at joelskousen.com. He's the editor-in-chief at World Affairs Brief. We'll give you all that information. But I really want to talk to him about the economy, about the fact that more and more of this information is coming out in the open, and about where he sees this as society, and the fact that they're trying to shut down the alternative media right now. Joel Skousen, we're honored to have you with us today.
Well, thank you, Alex, and I'm honored to be part of your show. I really appreciate what you've been doing, and I just rejoice in the success you're having in your fundraising. You know, our public radio stations don't get half that kind of funding in the days that you've accumulated, so congratulations.
Well, thank you. Without the listeners, we couldn't do anything. People say, why do I talk about Glenn Beck? I just want to spend a few minutes with this. Cleon Skousen, your uncle, wrote The Naked Communist and The Naked Capitalist, two of the seminal works that were really the genesis of my awakening. Then I found None Dare Call It Conspiracy and other seminal works, groundbreaking works. And he challenged Glenn Beck a few months ago on air to step it up. I've challenged him. I now have multiple people inside Fox on top of who I already had. And they say he's scared, everything you'd actually been told. He's saying they want to put poison in the water, they want world government, they want death camps, that he's now talking about major foundations, not small ones. And suddenly they're really coming after him. Now he has health problems. And people say, why do you reach out to Glenn Beck? Well, I mean, he's out there representing the Patriot movement, whether he's a sellout or not. We've got to at least try to communicate with him, and he's going in the right direction. And I put out the story about Diet Coke, which they admit, even in Fox News, causes cancer and blindness, macular dystrophy. And his co-host, while he was in the hospital, made fun of us. But I actually have the clip now where he came and said, no, it is bad for you, and I appreciate them giving me that info. So this is real. I mean, we're actually communicating with him, and that's important.
Well, I think that's the right approach, Alex. I don't think Glenn Beck's a sellout. He got on the wrong side of the conspiracy fence early on, and I think his ego kept him from coming back. More realistic appreciation of that. He did, of course, have so-called independent analysts, the shills for government, popular mechanics give him a bum steer on the FEMA camps. But he has apparently come around where the conspiracy issue is undeniable relative to the global governance and eugenics and other things, and it scares him to death. And I think he's under a lot of stress right now because he knows it's going to be very difficult, if impossible, for him to breach that subject on Fox without kicked off the network, and he's having a fit of conscience, I think. So I think he needs support.
Well, we know that George Soros and all these people are attacking him, and they also attack me, and I know I'm for real. And so that also brings another issue. And then he told the New York Times that they may basically fire him. That was some of the intel I was getting. And they've taken 297 of his sponsors. So the overall global system, we know there's different factions in the Anglo-American system, they don't like Beck.
That's right. I think this is the case where it ran away from them. I think they originally saw him as a wild card, someone who could easily discredit the movement. And to a certain extent, they have been able to take pot shots at him. He isn't the most careful spokesman, and he does goof around a little bit too much. But nevertheless, I think it ran away from them. They thought he was going to be a foil for the movement, so to speak, and now he's turned out to be fairly credible. He is having a very large impact in bringing a lot of people, in the mainstream who haven't got agitated about what our government...
Exactly. He's bringing them to us, and I've got a really strong gut, Joel, and it took me decades to learn to always follow it, because, it's never wrong. It's discernment, as the Bible says, as you know. I'm not saying, I'm great and mighty and some genius, and we all have discernment if God gives it to us. But just 6 months ago, I'd watch him, and something was wrong, and I had a really bad feeling. More and more, you can see he's freaked out. He realized this is eternity he's involved in. This is a major crossroads he's at, and he is slowly moving in the right direction.
Yeah, I think eventually we're going to see him shut down. I frankly think that, because I do think that he's got his heart in the right place, and the more he gets his eyes opened, as I say, I don't think he's going to be able to mesh well with Fox News. Eventually, I think he's going to get shut down.
Just like Lou Dobbs getting thrown out of CNN.
That's right. That's right. Exactly right.
Yeah, I've talked to Lou a little bit and off behind the scenes, and he's a real patriot. He really tried the best he could in that mainstream context to tell the truth.
Yeah, he started to, when he first got off the air and got kicked off, he started to turn around and kind of make peace, but they weren't having any of it. Once he'd betrayed the establishment, they weren't letting him back in, so I think Lou Dobbs is going to be permanently outside their reach now. Okay,
I'm going to give you the floor, and my brain moves so quick, just like yours and others, that I tend to interrupt because of thoughts that you spur. Joel Skousen, I want to give you the floor, and I did this earlier with another guest. I'm going to go in the control room 15 feet away. I'm going to listen to you for 20 minutes, talk about the economy, the global implosion, the world government being announced, run by the banks, the incredible announcement by the private Federal Reserve to publicly have dollar devaluation as a, quote, way to get us out of our debts. That's like if you have one leg chopped off, chopping off the other to fix it, or jumping in front of a moving train. I want you to speak about that, overall geopolitical issues, anything else you want to cover. And Joel, are you comfortable with having 20 minutes here at the helm?
Yeah, I do it all the time when I get on with Dr. Stan. He says, take it away. And
okay, well, you know what, then? We're going to give you 30 minutes. I'm going to come back with a few final comments. I may pop in a few times, but I'll be right here riding shotgun with you. Joel Skousen, gold all-time record highs. What do you see the strategy of the globalist? I don't see them doing well. I believe they're really getting into a lot of trouble. Can you answer that question first before you get into all the other economy issues? Do you concur that all is not well in Anglo-American land, and clearly there's these other fissures with the other two power blocks, and where do you see this going, and what can we do after you talk about what's happening to really accelerate the restoration of the Republic? Joel Skousen of World Affairs Brief, you have the floor.
Thanks, Alex. I want to begin, first of all, by commenting a little bit about what Mr. Tarpley was talking about on the uninterrupted section before I came on, and it's a little bit of a dangerous subject, but it meshes exactly with where I want to get to about fiat money, the greatest fraud ever, which is the subject of tomorrow's World Affairs Brief. The Webster was trying to make the case that you can take printed fiat money in the Fed, and as long as you put it into American infrastructure, it seems to be okay because it's permanently part of us and we're gaining benefit. But as he went through his list, and it got longer and longer, and he started to talk about outer space, he started to talk about all of these things that you could throw money at. But as long as it's infrastructure, it's okay. This is typical of the entrapment of free money, and it is dangerous because, in fact, it still dilutes and diminishes every dollar that we've ever made. Now, when we trade our dollars in and exchange our labor and our wages and other things for dollars, it actually is trading our labor. It means something because we're just given real value for it. And the government takes every one of those dollars and starts to devalue it every time they print an additional dollar and hand it out to somebody. And so eventually that money comes home, and believe me, if you're building highways, if you're building maglev trains, that dollar isn't coming to me. Those dollars are first and foremost going to people who are getting those free jobs from government. And they're not quality jobs because they're competing with my dollars. They're competing with everything else that I earn. And they come home with barrels of dollars and they start spending it, and prices go up. And if eventually it attacks that is paid by us, there is no free lunch by printing dollars. And so I wanted to disabuse our listeners of those problems. I think a great deal of Webster Tarpley and many of his analysis, but that's where I have a strong disagreement that any use of money is a problem, it's a tax upon us, and a fraud upon the American people. I began my introduction talking about, and I will get through in this introduction in this 30 minutes, the answers to your questions, Alex, because I do have answers of where they're going, how fragile they are, what are the prospects for collapse. The entire subject of this week's World Affairs Brief is the fact that the end is coming. This is not something that they can prolong forever. I will differ in those people who claim that there's going to be imminent collapse, that think that in the sense that I believe strongly that we must not underestimate the power of the Fed, the power of this conspiracy, which controls so many elements of the economy, having lured people in to insider status within government to continue to manipulate markets and to print additional monies without it growing into hyperinflation. We, in fact, have a fundamental difference between Weimar Germany in the sense that their base of the money supply was much reduced compared to ours. We have a $200 trillion base of dollars that have been printed and spread around the world. And so when you print an additional $3 or $4 trillion, which normally would cause hyperinflation in Argentina or in any other third world country, it only ends up being 1.5% to 2% of the money supply in the United States. It's a long way from hyperinflation. But the things that keeps this Ponzi scheme going, and there's no doubt about it, as Richard Russell says, it makes Ernie Madoff's Ponzi scheme look like a piker. This has been degrading and devaluing our value of our currency. Ever since the Fed came into power, we've lost 95% of our purchasing power. But there's a common incentive to keep this system going. Government gets to spend without appearing to raise taxes. Its inflation tax is relatively hidden. It's low, inexorable price increases. Citizens in turn become the recipients of dozens of government welfare and benefit schemes, health care, education grants, education loans, food subsidies, welfare benefits, and they don't appear to have to pay for it. So it's addictive. The trouble is that once it's started down this path, no one can stop it. No one wants to take the consequences or pay the consequences in real dollars, in real value, for cutting this off. In the end, this thing must collapse, but that's our analysis here. How long can they keep going on this? Well, the interesting point is to analyze here what they can do with the dollars that they print. Right now that they're basically pouring most of the money into the speculative economy via the big banks. This is not going into the consumer hand. There was a major stimulus spending in August in June and July of 2008, creating the highest rate of inflation in the United States by August of 2008. That's what happens when you inject money directly into the hands of consumers. It's directly inflationary in terms of price increases. But when you start injecting it into the big banks and they don't spend it into the economy, they don't invest it, they don't own it, because they're basically padding their own recapitalization accounts, and they're investing it, borrowing from the Fed at zero interest rates and investing it in the stock market and in various money and Forex accounts, gaining 3 to 8% interest. Why should they loan to the American people when they can make money like that without any risk? So this has not been particularly inflationary, but the inflation rate is in fact higher than what we have been led to believe. And that's what's important to understand, is that in fact there's even a policy within the Federal Reserve now that they want to raise the inflation rate as a way in which to get Americans to pull out all of the money that they're holding in reserve. And many Americans are holding a lot of money in reserve, and they're not spending because this instability, this distrust, that we're not into a recovery, in fact. But they feel like if they can raise the inflation rate a couple of percentage points and start to panic people into thinking, gee, I'm really losing out by having my money in the bank, they'll pull it out and start to spend it. Now, the reaction of the public is actually correct. Converting cash into durable goods, and this is part of Alex's question about what do you do about this? Inflation starts to raise its ugly head. The worst thing you can do is keep your money in paper dollars. You need to convert it into durable goods, something that will last, into capitalization that will in fact make you additional money in the future. And that's one of the few things that people do to mitigate the effects of the declining dollar. one of those hard goods that people can purchase is gold and silver. Gold now and silver are at all-time highs, and though there will and may well be a correction, it probably won't be more than 10%, and I can guarantee you that it has no place to go up, but it's significantly high in the long term. And one of the reasons for that is because there's a major Ponzi scheme in the gold markets that needs to be discussed. The big question is, where is the physical gold? And nobody seemed to worry about this before because most of the gold, about 98% of the gold is sold in gold contracts around the world. But now it's come to light that the London gold market, the largest in the world, has in fact only a tiny fraction of physical gold to fulfill all of the billions in gold contracts that they market every day in the gold markets of London. So they've created billions in contracts and have no actual gold to back them up. And for too long, gold investors have been content to roll over gold contracts, take their profits in dollars. Now many are starting to take delivery in gold itself, and the London gold market is scrambling to find supplies, because if they fail to deliver when people demand delivery, then they're liable and the whole Ponzi scheme is revealed. Nothing is more symbolic of this than J.P. Morgan starting to reopen its underground gold vault in New York that was mothballed in 1990. The timing is just a little peculiar. Not 10 days earlier, Jamie Dimon, the CEO of J.P. Morgan, which has long been the biggest shorter of precious metals in the world, owned by synthetic emissions, even to the tune of 100 times leverage, opened a precious metal vault in Asia. So we have to ask the question. Tyler Durden of ZeroHedge.com asked this. He says, is J.P. Morgan seeing a terrific business opportunity in warehousing gold, or are they happen to be setting up multiple gold warehouses so that they can fulfill one order, transfer gold from another to another, in other words, play the old shell game to be able to keep this Ponzi scheme going? I'm convinced they don't have but 10% of the gold in supplies to fulfill demand, and there's about 90% of gold that's floating around in paper contracts that cannot, in fact, be fulfilled. They've got to keep this scam going as long as they can, and the way to do that, of course, is to assure people that we can fulfill the contracts. One of the ways to keep from having to do that for everyone is to assuage their fears by saying, we'll hold your gold for you. We'll guarantee that we have physical numbered bars that you can deposit in our vault. But, of course, nobody ever gets into those vaults to check, just like nobody has checked or audited the Federal Reserve holdings either at Fort Knox or in the basement of the New York Federal Reserve Bank. So this brings us to the question of who can you really trust nowadays? Well, as some of the insiders who came on with movie director Charles Ferguson, he just put out an excellent documentary called Inside Job, and one of his major insiders, Satyajit Das, who's a financial commentator, said basically, you don't trust any of these boys on Wall Street. Get out of the paper markets. It's all a fraud. And the entire documentary shows that there's, in fact, a tremendous amount of experts that don't know what they're talking about. They essentially have so many conflicts of interest that they can't tell the truth. And it's a real problem. This has a great deal of relationship to the foreclosure nightmare. Right now there's talk about a moratorium on foreclosures nationwide. I don't think that's going to happen, frankly. Let me first of all cover the role of the MERS system, that's MERS, which is the mortgage electronic registration system, MERS. It's filed thousands of foreclosure actions around the country. This is a private company formed and arrested in Virginia by the very big banks, investment banks like Goldman Sachs and J.P. Morgan, and the mortgage processors. They founded it in 1995 to speed up the legal record keeping of mortgages and sales of mortgages through securitization. Well, there's a reason they had to do that, because when you sell a mortgage-backed security, you package 1,000 mortgages together and you transfer them to one buyer, and he sells it the next day to another buyer. Technically, by the law, every one of those mortgages has to go before a title company and a notary, and the seller has to appear before and sign on the dotted line, and has to be secured what the interest and what the payments and what the status of the mortgage is before you can transfer it. So in other words, there was no way that they could actually create mortgage-backed securities under existing law. And so without any fundamentals whatsoever in law, the big banks created the MERS system, which essentially is the system of simply signing, multiple signings, hundreds of thousands of signings, automatic signings, asserting that the transfer has taken place without, in fact, anyone ever appearing before a mortgage notary and following the law. Now, of course, homeowners, lawyers, and advocacy groups contend that MERS has no right to initiate the actions because it doesn't own the mortgage loans, and they're absolutely right. And several judges now ruled that that is just, in fact, the case. And it's not trivial, because mortgage title companies themselves are on the hook for millions in these mortgages. When you foreclose a home, they have to certify the title. And many of these people have been leaned on to certify the title, even though they haven't, in fact, been able to follow the documentation. So there's a great deal of criminality and fraud here, and I think that the powers that be are really desperate to get this thing worked out. Let me show you what the backlog looks like. In Florida, for example, they have what's called the rock docket. It's grind to a halt. This is the case where they don't have to appear before a judge, but they have an administrative judge who, in essence, spends about 30 seconds per mortgage and just clears it just in a row. They can go through 500A, and all that has been put on hold because of the financial challenges. The circuit, just in Clearwater, Tampa alone, covers an area that has a backlog of 33,000 foreclosure cases, and they're piling up now at 1,000 a day now that the moratorium is in effect. The cost to the potential banks is astronomical. The tab could reach $6 billion. Investigations of how banks are seizing homes will prolong foreclosures by as much as 3 months, and it costs banks approximately $1,000 a month for each month that the house is still in the pipeline, not being sold. Hiring firms to go through the legal technicalities and curing the mortgage defects, the paperwork defects, would cost them $1 million a year, each bank. So this sounds like, to me, a good excuse for the banks to cut a plea deal and settle for what the public thinks is a big fine